Let's make sbriciolata, the easier, crumblier cousin to crostata. To a bowl, add 200 grams, 1.5 cups plus 2 tablespoons of flour. To this, add 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of baking powder and a pinch of salt. Give that a little whisk to mix it all together. Then add in 75 grams, 5.5 tablespoons of cold butter that you've chopped and cubed. I'm going to start working that together with my fingers, but you could make this really easy by doing it all in the food processor. When you squeeze the mixture together, it should hold together like wet sand does, and then it easily breaks apart in your fingers. That's how you know it's ready. Add in 1 egg. I'm going to just gently whisk mine up with a fork. This helps incorporate it into the flour mix a little bit easier. And then add in 60 grams, 2 3/4 tablespoons of runny honey. And we're just going to start mixing this together. Your dough will look really soft at this point, but once we put it in the refrigerator, it will firm up some, so don't worry. It should look like this. Cover your dough and pop it in the refrigerator for at least 30 minutes to set up. I'm using an 8-inch springform pan for this recipe so that it's nice and easy to pop out of the tin when it's baked. But you can use a regular pie dish if you haven't got a springform pan. Here's a nice trick that I like to use when I'm using springform pans. It's much easier to just pop the bottom on the way that it is. However, if you want to make sure to have a nice flat bottom on your cake or your tart, flip it over and use this side. It's more raised, which means you won't get a pocket of air underneath your parchment. So all I do is I pop my parchment on top of the bottom piece of my pan, and then I take my pan piece. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky when you flipped it over. You kind of have to help it out by pressing the bottom up and then locking your pan. And then you can just gently pull your parchment so that it's nice and flat along the bottom. I'm trimming some of the excess of my paper, but not all of it because it makes for a nice handle when you're pulling out your bake afterwards. Preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 185 degrees Celsius. For our filling, you want to take 250 grams or 1 cup of creamy ricotta cheese and add in 47 grams, 2 1/4 tablespoons of runny honey, and the zest of a lemon. This bit is optional, but I find it adds a really nice brightness to the dish. I've omitted all of the sugar from this recipe and used honey instead. It adds a natural sweetness and it cuts down that sugar level just a little bit. And give that a good mix. And that's ready to fill our cake. Once your dough has chilled, split it into 2/3 and 1/3. Take the 2/3 piece out and this will form the base of our sbriciolata. I'm going to cover this back up and set it aside for now. The great thing about this dough is you don't have to roll it out. We're just going to press it into the bottom of our tin. Take your dough and spread it into the bottom of your pan, letting it come slightly up the sides so that it holds in all the filling. And then what I like to do to make sure it's nice and even is take a flat bottom glass and press it onto the pastry. You might want to add a little bit of flour to it. Just keep adding a little bit of flour to the bottom of your glass or sprinkle a little bit over the pastry so that it doesn't stick as you press it down. You can see how nicely it's filling in any little gaps. Pour in your ricotta cheese and then smooth it out all over the bottom, making sure it's nice and even over the pastry. And the nice thing about using honey, and not a lot of it, is that this isn't really a super sweet dessert. Most Italian dishes aren't very sweet. This version has a ricotta cheese and blackberry filling, but the recipe is really adaptable, so you can add in whatever fruits you like, or you can swap out the cheese and the fruit and just add jam. And then over the top of your ricotta layer, add in 200 grams, 1 3/4 cups of blackberries. And try and make them as even as possible. I'm using frozen berries that I harvested from a friend's garden, but you can swap out the equal amount of fresh berries. You don't even need to thaw your frozen berries, just pop them in as they are. And then with your remaining dough, just rip little pieces and plop them on top. Much easier than rolling out a lattice, right? But a lattice does look really elegant for a special occasion. When she was in a rush, my nonna used to make this and crumble the dough on the top. But if you're looking for something a little bit more refined, you should try her crostata recipe, which has a beautiful lattice crust on the top. I've linked that recipe below. This way does have a really rustic quality about it. And like with any crumble, if you have some gaps and the fruit shows through, that's perfectly fine. It adds to the look. That looks perfect. Now let's pop it in the oven. This will bake for 20 to 25 minutes. If the top is getting a little bit too brown, but the bottom isn't quite cooked, just cover it with some foil. You'll want to let this cool to room temperature before trying to demold it. While it's still hot, I like to run a knife around the outside to make sure it doesn't crack while it's cooling. Now that your sbriciolata has cooled, you can unmold it. And remember earlier how I said about these handles? It allows you to easily pick it up and move it to wherever you want to serve it. And now you just need to slide the paper out from underneath. Once cooled to room temperature, you can store this in the refrigerator for up to 3 days. I wouldn't recommend freezing because it can change the texture of the cheese. And if you're overflowing with blackberries, you have to try my blackberry crumble bars. They're always a winner. Thank you so much for watching, and if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button. We'll see you next week.